In this video, we're going to be talking about how to implement two card game mechanics in Unity, specifically dragging and dropping the cards across the screen and snapping the cards into place onto positions on the board. Let's start with the setup. I've provided three prefabs for us to use. The first is this board slot, which just represents one individual piece of the board, and how to assemble the board is you could just put these all into the game scene and use hold V, and you could snap it to the vertex of the other one, of the other board slot, and you could just assemble however size you want. In this case, I provided a board for us because I don't want to snap all those on video. Um, but it's just a cube, and I angled the camera so it looks like you're looking down tabletop onto a game. And let's drag some of these cards onto this screen. So these cards are just um, cubes that I've scaled down to be flat, and I've added a canvas to each of them, um, so that you can put images on either side and decorate your cards. So now that we have our board, let's implement our first feature, dragging and dropping. I'm going to implement a empty game object here called drag and drop, and I'm going to drag our script, drag and drop into it. Oops, I missed. If you're following along, you could just write this from scratch, but I have it written, and we're going to walk through it line by line to see what's going on. First, the variables lift is just how high we're going to raise the card off the table as we're dragging it. Held is a game object, and it's a reference to the card that we're changing the position of. These two are constants that represent mouse left and mouse right when reading an input. And held Y is just going to be our derived Y position of the card when we lift it up. The basic workflow in our update function is if we're not holding something and the mouse button that we're reading in as input is left click, then we're going to want to pick up the card. Otherwise, if the mouse button is being released and it's left click, then we want to drop the card if we are holding something. Let's implement pickup first. Before we talk about how to implement pickup, let's talk about the mechanic that we're using that is really important for both our features today, and that is casting a raycast from the mouse position. And how do we actually do that? Well, first we have to get the mouse screen positions in terms of the camera's nearest point and the camera's farthest points. What does that mean? Well, we're defining two variables here, near mouse position and far mouse position. And what these are, they're both vector 3s that have the same x and y, which is the position of the mouse in the 2D space of the screen. Uh, but we need a z, and in this case, it's the camera's near clip plane and the camera's far clip plane. And we haven't really worked with these before. What this means is a camera has a limited length of view, and the near clip plane is the position at which you can, it's the closest position that the camera can see, and the far clip plane is the furthest position that the camera could see. In this case, it's this plane, this rectangle. The camera would not be able to see anything beyond that. To implement drop, let's go into our update function and add this drop function to the releasing left click branch. And how we're going to implement drop is the idea is we want to send out another raycast, and if we hit a collider and the tag's name is board slot, then we want to get the position of that board slot in the world and set the card's position so that now that we know how to send out a raycast from the mouse position, we can continue with our pickup function. The first thing we want to do is send out the mouse raycast and store it in our variable hit. If we hit a collider and the collider's tag is card, then we want to set our held to the game object that we hit and calculate held y, which is just the y position of the card plus the global lift variable that we have, and we want to hide the cursor. And you might notice we're not actually changing the position of the card here. That's going to come in our drag variable. So in our update function, if we are holding something, then we want to drag it along the mouse. For our drag function, we're going to be doing something similar to what we did in the raycast function. First, we want to calculate the screen position. In this case, It's going to be the X and the Y of the mouse on the 2D screen, and we're going to convert the world position, the Z world position of the card we're holding to a screen point, and then we're going to call camera.main.screen to world point and turn the screen position into a world position. And then finally, we can change the object's position uh, to the world position.x and world position.z of our world position here, and held Y is the lift that we have implemented for the card. So let's see how this is coming along in our game right now. So if we hover over this card and click left click, we should be able to pick it up, and there it is. Now we could drag it around. But if I let go, I can't drop it yet. So let's implement dropping. To implement drop, let's go into our update function and add this drop function to the releasing left click branch. And how we're going to implement drop is, the idea is we want to send out another raycast, and if we hit a collider and the tag's name is board slot, then we want to get the position of that board slot in the world and set the card's position to that position, and then raise it a little so that it looks like it's on the board. And that is what we are doing here when we set held's transform position to the slot position.x and slot position.z of the board slot. And what this onboard height is just a little bit of lift again to make the card appear to be lying on the table itself. And how I got that, kind of a hacky way, I just went into the game inspector and copied over the Y position of the card originally before I left it and put it in here. There's probably a better way, but that suits this tutorial well enough. And now you might be thinking to yourself, if we're dragging the card around with the mouse, how are we going to hit the board with the raycast from the mouse if the card is always in front of the mouse? And that's a really good observation. To solve this problem, we're going to use Unity's layers, and by default, every object is in the default layer, but there is a layer that is in every game called the ignore raycast layer. Um, I think by default it's 2, but you can set the layer by looking at the layer masks and name to layer ignore raycast and set it to this variable. By default, everything's in the default layer, which is 0. And when we pick up the card, we want to set the held's layer to ignore raycast, and when we drop it, we want to set it back to the default layer. And when we go into Unity, let's see how this works now. Cool, so I'm dragging it, I'm holding the mouse left button down, and if I drop it, then cool, it drops onto the slot that we're hovering, and it snaps to position. Since we have some time, I thought we could implement another feature that makes the snapping to place a little more intuitive for the game player. In this case, I'm going to add a function called slot hover to our update function if we're holding a card. And what slot hover is going to do is we're going to send out the raycast once more, and if the collider hit is a board slot, then we want to delegate to this board slot controller script that I added to the board slot pieces, and we want to highlight them. What this script does is it keeps track of a public highlighted color that you could set in the inspector, a boolean highlighted, which is going to be defaulted to false, and two another color, the original color, and the renderer of the board slot. And when we start the game, we want to get a reference to this renderer, and then take the original color out of that renderer. So we have a reference to that, and highlighted is going to start as false. And in each frame, if we're not being highlighted, then we want to set the color to the original color. Otherwise, we want to set it to the highlighted color. And after each update, we want to reset highlighted to false, so that we're only highlighting the board slot if highlight is continually being called, because that is where highlight is set to true. And this is a function that is called by drag and drop. Now that we have all our features, let's see how they come together in a small demo. As you can see, we could pick up the card and drop it and do this for each card. And if we move the card along the table and hover over each board slot, you can see that every board slot is being highlighted. and it snaps in place. And yeah, that's the tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed and learned something. The drag and drop feature, it can be used for other things, but I chose to use it for this card game. And yeah, thanks for watching.